And I am joined today, I know you can't see my video, I'm on a bit of a shaky connection, so I'm just going to do audio for the time being, but you can see my co-hosts Corey Roth, Chris Webb, who's muted himself, probably playing too much death metal in the background over there.
I'm here. I just had to fix my mic, but I didn't want to intrude. So.
And Jennifer Roth is here.
Howdy.
And somewhere lurking about, I'm sure, is our partner in crime, Mr. Paul McCollum. I'm sure he will bounce in and out. So we've got quite a bit to cover for you this month. Let's go through the regular introductory bits. Here, as always, of course, if you have questions, you can hit us up on the chat, which I see Jennifer has already started engaging on, being the social butterfly that she is. We have also just connected up to Twitter, so you can tweet at DFWSpug, and that'll connect to us. Behave yourselves on the socials, boys and girls. And so let's jump into the content for the month. First, we want to thank our sponsors, as always. K2, our longest running sponsor of the user group. Not sure if we have anyone from K2 with us. We'll have to see if they join us a bit later. Training Plus, also out of the UK as it happens. Sundown Solutions. I don't know if we have the other Chris Webb. I'm looking through the guest list here. I don't see him. Maybe he'll pop on later and say hello. And of course, ourselves at Binary Wave. In addition to our gold sponsors at TripLight, Ampio Solutions, and SparkHound. If any of our sponsors are on the webcast, if you would please post into the chat, let everyone know you're there. Also, if you have any offers or anything that you would like to tell the audience, that is the place to do it, or send us a private message, and we'll be happy to relay that information for you. You will see from time to time some offers pop up. There's Brennan from SparkHound. Brennan, welcome. Says he's having some audio issues. Brennan, if there's anything you would like to share, just type us up a quick message, drop it into the chat, and we'll make sure that we mention it. Janet is here from Ampio as well. All right, we've got some sponsors this month. Fantastic. Janet, same offer to you. If there's anything you would like to promote, please let us know over in the chat. We'll make sure that we touch on that during the session. For those who didn't get a chance to attend last month, or who would like to review last month's presentation, you can head on over to our channel, and there is the link on the webcast. If you'd like to access those slides, you can go into the handouts section and access the slide deck. I just posted a few minutes ago before we got started, so you can get all the links in the PDF from that. Head on over to our channel, and you'll see all of our previous recordings. Upcoming events, got a few things still on the calendar. This hasn't changed much, but we are dialing in on them here a bit. We have SP Fest, which is this week, as a matter of fact. So if you're going, you better get on it. Starting, I think today is when the primary session's kicked off. So that's in Seattle. So if you are in Seattle or heading that way, be sure to drop into SP Fest. SP TechCon is next week in Boston, Massachusetts. I will be there along with some other names you know, like Robert Bogue. And I'm not sure, Corey and Jen, I don't think you're going this time, are you?
Nope, not us.
Not this time. I'm going to have some Summer Shack lobster on your behalf and send you the pictures.
Enjoy.
Of course, Microsoft Ignite is November 4th through the 8th, and we just got some big news today that we'll be sharing for the first time here on the webcast, and we'll be posting to the website and our various social channels, but we will be broadcasting live from Microsoft Ignite, much the way that we did during the SharePoint conference, except this time you will get more of us than you got before. Every day we will do a recap of the best of Ignite for you and bring you either that day's or the previous day's events. Will drag in Microsoft people probably against their will, like we did last time, anytime we can get our hands on them, along with a wide range of MVPs and community folks and anyone else we can get a hold of that we think will contribute to the webcast. So look forward to that during the week of Ignite. Dates and time, exact dates and times to be determined. We will let you know as we go forward. when and how that will take place. Of course, that should not stop you from registering for the event and going if you have any intention to do so. I would guess that hotel rooms have filled up pretty quickly there at the moment, but probably like us, you'll be staying in Fort Lauderdale, I would guess, would be the closest to get there. There's probably some left way down International Drive, so we'll all Uber together back and forth. And then finally, Office and SharePoint Live coming up November 17th to the 22nd, also in Orlando, Florida, which I will be at as well. So I'll be spending a lot of time in Florida this fall, as well as the very next week, jetting off to Lisbon, Portugal, for the SharePoint Saturday that we're having there. And in between those dates, I believe, Paul, if I'm not mistaken, that you will be in the Netherlands.
Yes, we've got Office 365 and SharePoint Connect running. I can't remember the exact dates, but that's always good. I know we've got a few of your compadres coming over. I know Matthew McDermott's coming for that, and Chris Wheeler.
Yep. So that'll be an excellent event for those of you who just need an excuse to go to. Is it in Harlem again this year, Paul?
It is, yeah. Awesome place. It's kind of like it's all the good bits of Amsterdam without any of the bad bits.
Yeah. It's a brilliant place. I won't be there this year, unfortunately. But if you need an excuse to go visit Amsterdam and the surrounds, I highly suggest it. All right, it is now time for our monthly news segment, and I will flip it over to Mr. Chris Webb. Chris, it's all yours.
All right, can y'all hear me? I never got a mic check.
We can. You're good.
All right, cool. All right, so start out with teams. A lot hasn't changed much since last month. Biggest things that have rolled out are the app mention list mentions. I guess that's lack of better terms, but basically if you type someone's name in, it'll pick it up as a mention for you, so you can quickly just type, click on the name to app mention somebody if you forget to do app mention. Comes in handy. The calendar app, which I said last month was vaporware, apparently it started showing up in some people's tenants. So that's the overhauled meetings tab. They're changing it to calendar. It's going to be a full week and month view and a lot more additional features than what it had, because right now it's pretty basic and just kind of shows you your today and the week out. You can't change the dates or anything like that, but the new one's supposed to be a lot more feature rich. And I put July 31st, 2021. Anybody had heard that date over the last month? Basically, that's the end of life for Skype for Business Online. They announced that here over the past month, and pretty much everybody's going to be forced to Teams by that date. The only thing that really I think is going to work past that date is something to do with hardware, 3-pip, something, phone devices and stuff like that may work a little longer than that, but everybody's supposed to be migrated by then. Over the next 2-3 years, they're going to be, or I guess 2 years actually, they're going to start forcing the smaller tenants up to start migrating over to Teams. Pending releases, I'm not going to go over that. That was on last month's video, but native fed, read receipt, stuff like that. On SharePoint side, rolling out soon. They got page anchors coming out. Basically what those are is kind of like on the Docs site on Microsoft, where you have each section and next to it you have a little link, similar to that, where you can have a hyperlink, click down and start at a certain position on your page. They're putting that in where you can add that to your news pages or SharePoint pages. They've rolled out some new weather web part that you can put multiple cities in now, and some world clock web part updates. Vertical sections. I saw the button in my tenant, but I couldn't get it to work. So I think it's rolling out, maybe on some. Jennifer, if you're on, you can maybe see if you've played with that at all. But apparently we're supposed to be getting a vertical section that we can add to the right side or somewhere on the page where you can just have web parts on one part. Previously you had a big section on the left and then a vertical on the right. So I don't know how it's going to be different. I haven't gotten to play with it myself, so I just know it's coming. Undo, redo on pages.
It'll let you change the colors and stuff like that. So it will be on the very bottom. It will, where you do the sections, it will be like a dotted line, and it will show. And then once you add that new section, then you can go into that section and change features about that section, so shading and stuff like that.
Right.
But you go right where you do the sections and do it. Haven't seen it in a single tenant that I have. I checked all of them yesterday because I want to update a site and I want to change the color and use it. But I do have some I went to a site that had a hero web part stretched all the way across the top and then changed the section, and it responded really well as if it was getting ready to do the sections. I just don't think it's fully there for me, but it broke nicely so that it broke in a pretty way. So
Yeah.
I was happy with that. So
Yeah, I haven't
hopefully
seen it.
soon.
And I looked last night and I saw, like, when you do the new section plus, verticals in there, but it's gray. You can't do nothing with it. So
Yeah, so hopefully in the next couple of days.
hopefully, yeah. Drag and drop to the canvas. So pretty much when you edit pages, you can drag images in and it'll create an image web part for you, upload it, do all that instead of having to go in and manually save the file and do X, Y, and Z and all that. So it's just quality of life stuff for editing pages. Same with files. Bulk approvals. So this is a flow thing with SharePoint. So previously you could only do one item at a time, go to flow and kick it off for approval. Now you can select batches and submit them off for approvals. They've added more hover card improvements with like activity highlights. If Office comments get left on files and people view, edit the files, it all shows up in the hover card now. Added a couple of Flow and Power Apps things in here that are pretty big. I mean, there's obviously a lot more things in that. We usually don't go into too much detail, but in Flow, you can cut, copy, and paste now. This is pretty huge. If anybody creates flows, you'll know the pain of wanting to move something from one place to the other or copy something. Now you can do it. It's a big time quality of life improvement for Flow. Power Apps has added ability to right click things. Before you right click, you get the browser menu. Now you can actually, copy, paste, do things by right clicking in the Power App canvas. And another huge one that relates to SharePoint is you can now, if you guys know what delegation is when it comes to Power Apps, you can only query 500 by default or up to 2,000 records in one swoop when you're creating a Power App. And at one time. And delegation means if you query something, if it's not delegable or whatever, you'll always get the first 2,000 records no matter what. It won't filter past that. So if you do have delegation on something, it'll actually filter on the data source side, then return the filtered result set. So that said, choice and people column in SharePoint, when you use it as data source, can now be delegable. So you can actually filter on those items when you have large lists or libraries. So, and that's all I got for this month. Is there any questions on that? Not seeing nothing. You there, Eric?
Can you all hear me?
Can now.
All right. Well, I think we lost Eric, maybe.
Yeah, I think.
So,
Everyone can hear me.
Oh.
So they say.
okay, now I can hear you.
All right, there we go. Maybe a little bit of delay. So let's see. We have a little bit of developer-y news here, re-mentioning the OneDrive community samples from last month because I didn't have anything else new in OneDrive to talk about. Again, mentioning the Microsoft 365 App Awards. Those are still running, so you can go and nominate your apps or somebody else's apps for that, or get started building one. The latest version of SharePoint Framework has shipped, 1.9.1. These are incremental improvements. Pardon me, sorry about that. These are some incremental improvements and bug fixes. You can check the release notes there. I checked with Veza, and he said that there was no requirements for us to update the Visual Studio extension, but I haven't tested that yet. So we still need to check and make sure that that's up to date. But this should be a relatively minor release. They talked about it in the PNP community call, which is linked there for August. You can go and check that out along with the SPFX community call. There is some new stuff on the PNP channels there. I was just browsing through real quick to see what was there. Is a few updated samples and new things and whatnot, so you can go out and check those out. And in a moment, I'm going to flip it over to our featured presentation from Mr. Paul Hunt, but a couple of things that I need to mention. First, one is we've been testing some audio and video connectivity between us from his connection and the connection I've got and whatnot. It's a bit shaky, so what we've done is Paul has been kind enough to record some of the demos in advance for us. He's going to talk us through them. So you'll still be able to answer questions and get some feedback and get his input as on them when he steps through. He might not be able to show you something live in response to your questions, but all those videos, of course, will be included in the body of the webinar. So when it goes up for recording, you'll be able to access all of those. So we thought that was better than constantly breaking demos for you, so at least we can give you the full experience. And then second, apparently, I need to ascertain before Paul begins why it's so important that everything he does be level.
I'm going to shoot Spencer. Yeah, that's I installed a new kitchen earlier this year, and I proudly posted some photos, and Spencer said that's not level, and I proved it was level with one of the many spirit levels that I had, and he just hasn't let me live it down.
I'm not sure he believes you.
He doesn't.
All right. So just to get that inside joke out of the way, if you follow Paul at all on Facebook, and I assume you have some links to your socially stuff in your presentation, Paul, but if you follow him, you will see him being given much stick about keeping things on the level on a regular basis. And there is the answer to that long-running inside joke.
And I should agree with Don there, yes.
Spence never lets an inside joke die, ever. All right, and so without further ado, Paul, it is all yours. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. I mean, to be fair to Spence, it's moved on from when I forgot to reinstall PowerPoint and found out an hour before giving a session at a SharePoint Saturday, so it's an improvement. So let me share my screen, and hopefully everyone should see my title screen coming up.
I should mention while that's coming up that there is a brisk amount of chat going on over in the chat window regarding some of the news items that came up during Chris's portion. So feel free to flip on over to the chat as well. And if you want the slide deck, you can grab it from the handouts. And I see I haven't stalled quite long enough to get your presentation up and running, but I'm working on it. I'll have to tap dance next. There we go.
Excellent. Cool. So let's just do a quick intro to me. So I'm a solutions architect for a gold partner in the UK called Trustmark, co-organizer of the SharePoint user group in the London region. And I've been playing with this thing called SharePoint since, playing with SharePoint since 2005. And I kind of got involved in the community in around 2007 and been stuck there for quite some time. I've been lucky enough to be an MVP now for 4 years. I'm really pleased about that. And as a hobby, I kind of get away from the computer and do wood turning. My socials on the side there. I do blog occasionally, generally only when I've got something to say, which isn't that often. But you can generally find me on Twitter at Kimmerus. So I do a bit of, get rid of the big marker thing. I do a bit of wood turning as well. This is just my kind of therapy from IT. I win a few things and occasionally make mistakes. And I always like to say to people that, wood turning is like Office 365. If we're not paying attention, you end up going through the bottom. So this session really is about understanding what levels of access control are available to us in Microsoft 365. And I want to cover off what's available for free and what's going to cost you some money. So we're going to look at what licenses give the control. We're going to talk about access requests using entitlement packages. And one here for me is understanding the difference between, what's the difference between conditional access and privileged access control. So to come on to this subject, we need to understand a little bit about the access layers in 365. So obviously we have our data and configuration. There's all the data we upload, all the configuration of our services, and that's generally protected by Microsoft through encryption. So they use BitLocker at rest. The data is encrypted, it's passed in and out, and that's just to prevent unauthorized access. At the next layer, we've got our role-based access control and conditional access. So this is about controlling the standing access, the permissions that we have to that data. And then at the next level, we've got things like privileged identity management and privileged access management. So this is all about the just-in-time and the just-enough approval. So this is about enforcing elevation of privilege so that your admins only have the access they need to do what they need to do. And these two layers kind of are the governing layers for our legitimate access. The first bit we're going to talk about is the role-based access control and conditional access. And part of this is also about the first part of governing legitimate access. So this is looking at access reviews and conditional access. So how do we actually control and limit that access, and how do we make sure people only have the permissions they need? But to actually talk about access, we need to understand the difference between authentication and authorization. So I travel a lot, and authentication for me is every time I cross a border, I have to show my passport. And that's authenticating me to the authorities. It's saying, you know, this is the person, this is their trusted identity. You can believe this is who they are. What it doesn't do is say what I can and can't do. You know, my passport doesn't give me permission to go and do something. It just authenticates who I am. And in the traditional sense, whenever we've talked about permissions and identity management, these two have been very separate experiences. But things like conditional access now are starting to blur these boundaries. And we can now vary what someone can do, not just based on who they are, but what they're accessing, what device are they using, where are they accessing from, and I'm going to say when are they accessing in a bit of a call out here. We can do when are they accessing if we look at things like ADFS and pass-through authentication. So we can use logon hours in our on-premises Active Directory to control when someone can come in. But what we can't do in conditional access at the moment is look at saying, okay, I'm going to allow John in between the hours of 9 to 5 and not out of hours. Now, I know this is something that Microsoft have been looking at. The French have a wonderful law around their working time directive that states that, you know, you shouldn't be accessing your email outside of work. I can heartily agree with that, but it's not been implemented at all yet. The only problem with this is if you do sign in out of hours, you get a really horrible experience because you don't get told, okay, you can't sign in because it's outside your hours. You just get this, no, sorry, that's an incorrect user ID or password. So you just keep trying, and you know it's the right password. You just keep trying it. Luckily, if ADFS is honouring your logon hours, the lockout policies won't apply during this. So even if you sit there blasting it with passwords, you're not going to lock your account. When we step up and we look at some of the more advanced options, we can then start adding in some of the things like risk scores. And this is to start adding a little bit of artificial intelligence and behavior analysis to the process. So the EM plus SE5 license adds in things like impossible travel risk analysis and unsafe locations. And if we combine this with identity protection, that's a very powerful option. You know, we can look at things like signing in from anonymous IP addresses, so people coming from the Tor network. Impossible travel, so I've logged in from London and then 20 minutes later I've logged in from Jamaica. Chances are that's not me. We'll talk about some of the issues around that in a minute. The other one is sign-ins from unfamiliar locations. So I travel a lot to SharePoint Saturday, so I quite regularly get these, oh, you've signed in for the first time from Slovenia, for instance. I'm going to Slovenia in November, so that will be a sign in from an unfamiliar location. And as your company works and people travel and they sign in, the system starts to learn about what your company profile looks like, and it can adjust these detections as it goes. Excuse me. So we're going to start looking at the technology options that we've got to control access. And the first one that's available to us at any license level is ADFS. Now, traditionally, ADFS was the way to do single sign-on. And it was also one of the first ways where we could do conditional access. And the easiest conditional access with ADFS was total block. You basically just didn't publish your ADFS externally. It had some issues around Office 365 wanting to validate your certificates, but you could work around that manually, but the timing was critical. But if you didn't publish your ADFS endpoints, then people couldn't authenticate from outside. So that was a nice, simple way of making sure that only people internally could log on. What that didn't do is protect your on Microsoft.com, so your cloud accounts. But what we can do with ADFS, and depending on which server version you're using, there's a rule-driven menu or a template-driven in the later versions of the service. And we can look at things like blocking all external access to 365, blocking everything except Exchange Active Sync, blocking everything except browser-based apps, and then this is the one I saw used most, is blocking all external access except for a designated AD group. So you could decide who in your organization was going to be allowed access when they're outside the offices. Unfortunately, 2012 R2 had this horrendous way of typing in the rules, and they had these access rules. And this was fine until you wanted to then say, oh, Joe, we're going to block just our private IP addresses. And then you ended up with this horrible regex, which was just horrible to troubleshoot and absolutely scary. So 2016 introduced templates, which were a little bit nicer to write. So you basically chose this, and you could type in the network ranges, and that was definitely a lot nicer. But as I said, with ADFS, you can't block your tenant identities. So if you are using cloud identities, you've got no control over those. So that's our three options. I'll just check and see if we've got any chat comments there. Yes, authorization with a Z. Yeah, I use this deck in Europe. Sorry, Eric.
Yeah, no proper questions yet.
Cool. So moving on to the first kind of license, we're going to look at what's included in the basic Office 365 subscription. So this is pretty much anything that's in the E1, E3, or E5. So the basic thing we can do is we can look at things like SharePoint. So we can do some IP restrictions based around where the user's coming from, what type of authentication they're using. So we can turn off legacy authentication, so we can block. That will have an impact if you're using anything like PowerShell scripts that don't use WebLogon. So if you're using the PNP PowerShell, you can just use the WebLogon. It will impact if you're doing automation. So you'll need to start looking at things like AD service principals and using those instead, because you won't be able to use WebLogons in the scripts. But that's not too bad. The big problem I find with any of these kind of location-based restrictions is they can be really confusing to end users. So as a user, I can log into Office 365, but if I try and go to SharePoint, I get this access restricted. If I go to Teams, I can get into Teams, I can get into the chat. Now, this used to be the error. You used to see you don't have access to these files. I haven't actually had a chance to grab the screenshot now, but we'll see it in the demo. But now we actually do get a list of the files, but you just can't do anything with them. You can't open them. If you try and open them in the browser, it will block you. If you try and download them, it will block you. The other problem with location apps is it blocks all your mobile apps. They'll only work when you're on corporate Wi-Fi. And obviously opening up your traffic to the outside world to say, right, if it's on any of the networks, let them in. It's kind of not really security. If you use an MDM solution, you can route that traffic internally via some of the VPNs. But then we're starting to go against some of the network principles that Microsoft publish around accessing Office 365. So groups works. We go into groups in Office 365 and we can see the files. But again, if we download, we get the access restricted. And if we try and view in the browser, it'll open the document in the browser. But if you try and download or if you try and open in Word, you'll just get an error. We did have a problem as well. If you created a team while access was blocked, so I could log on from home, create myself a new team, I'd get this, we're setting up your files, check back in a few minutes. And 2 days later, I'd still have, we're setting up your files, check back in a few minutes. And they never actually got connected. Now, luckily, that's now been fixed. It does get created in the background. You just obviously can't access any files. From the Exchange side, and I'm not going to profess to being an Exchange expert at all, but we can do a certain amount around mobile device access. So we can look at locking down what can access Exchange. We can look at auto-quarantining devices, and then the admins would have to actually manually allow those in. But that only works with ActiveSync. So again, we don't have as much restriction that we can do around Exchange. We can also look at mailbox policies. So we can put restrictions on devices. So we can enforce that they must have a password and allow remote wipe and things like that. But the key one there is that remote wipe on that mailbox would also include the user's personal data on that device. The other thing we can look at is MFA. So we can enforce MFA through the Office 365 interface. We can enforce it on selected users. And we can also look at bypassing based on an IP range. So again, we know what our public IP ranges are that our NAT proxies use. So we can block and say, don't enforce MFA if I'm coming from this. So if I'm trying to access any of the other Office 365 services from outside of the trusted ranges, that will set it up. So you can do this without requiring conditional access. You don't require an Azure AD P1 or P2. The pro tip from Microsoft, though, is manage and enroll your users before you enforce MFA. There was a problem where anyone could register MFA and you couldn't put any conditional access in. Now you can actually enforce that your users need to be on your network before they're allowed to register. So again, that's something to think about and consider, but definitely look at mass enrolling your users, going out there, doing a communication piece to get them set up, talk them through what's required. Basically, when you set them up and send them to MFA setup, they'll get a point where it says, oh, we need some more information. They'll be asked to log on. When they're logged on, they'll be asked for some additional security verifications. So they'll look for the mobile app is definitely the recommended way of doing this. And then you can choose whether to receive notifications or use a verification code. So for those who are familiar with the old RSA tokens, the verification code is basically that. Personally, I prefer the receive notifications because it either pops up on my phone, or if you've got an Apple Watch, it pops up on your watch. So you don't have to scrabble in your bag for your phone. You can just hit approve and it lets you in. So we'll try the first of our videos.
Paul, just before we get to that, I think this was a slide or two back, but we had a question from Damien asking, can you set up a custom response instead of just saying access restricted?
Nope, unfortunately not.
That is unfortunate. I hope it's at least multilingual.
And I believe, yeah, it'll be localized for, I must admit, I haven't tried logging on through a Spanish site, but I would expect it to be multilingual and support all the languages that Office 365 do. But you wouldn't be able to actually change the text.
Rightio, carry on.
Right, I'm going to stop sharing. So this will be the first of our videos, hopefully. I'm going to mute this because I did talk over some of these, and I figured actually if the worst came to the worst, you could watch the videos afterwards and you'll get some chat from me. But I would rather show you. So what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to look at, oh, I thought I'd muted it. There we go. So we're going to look at perimeter blocking in the SharePoint Admin Center. So this is the new Admin Center. I'm still not completely convinced that I like it. And on the left-hand side there in policies and access control, we've got a number of things we can do. Now, beware that some of these do require you to have an Intune license. So things like unmanaged devices requires an Intune license, but the network location one doesn't. So I've got a few set up here already. The key thing, and I'm going to call it out in the video here, is make sure you don't lock yourself out, because if you do, it's a very embarrassing service call to Microsoft to say, can you let me back in, please? I've locked myself out. So I always make sure I've got at least a device in Azure that's in that list. So I know even if I lock myself out, I can get to it. So this is connecting from outside of the permitted range. And we're going to see pretty much similar to the to what we saw in the screenshots. So if I go into Outlook, we can access and we see the mailbox as we'd expect. If I go into OneDrive, we see that access denied. I love that. Here's a few ideas. Contact your organization. Moan at your admins. And then if we drop into Teams, we'll see the nicer experience now. So if I go into a team that's actually got some files, this was the fixed issue where it didn't connect. So this one was actually created from a blocked IP, but it did create the files tab. And you can see actually the share files in this channel. Into the files tab, you can see that I can see the files. In fact, if I go into this one where I have some files, we'll go into the files tab. Why won't that mute? Files are there. There we go. Stay muted, Paul. Okay, so you can get into the files tab, but yeah, you can't interact with it. If I try it in Teams, that really wants to keep talking, doesn't it? There we go. So we can see the files, but you can't access them. You can't interact with them. And yeah, if I drag and drop a file in, as expected, we can't talk to SharePoint, so it won't actually upload. The file upload failed. Eric, you're messing with me, aren't you? So this is the MFA.
Well,
One of our
actually,
other
what's
options on the
happening,
Office
Paul
365
McCollum
license is
stopped
to look at
trying
enforcing MFA.
to do audio. Paul McCollum is trying to join us on the auto, but every time he does, it turns your audio for the video back on.
Oh, excellent. Oh, okay.
So, McCollum, be quiet.
So this is just going through the Office 365 admin panel. And let me just roll that one back because we were talking a bit there. So I've gone to the user, didn't get back far enough. Gone to the user, pulled up the user information panel, and go to the Manage Multi-Factor Authentication link down there on the bottom right. So this is where we can actually look at managing authentication. Although I selected the user there, it actually takes me to the panel for everyone, which I then have to search for Don again. There we go. And he's currently disabled. Enabled his multi. We've already registered him. Enable him. So he's now enabled. So is that when he tries to log on,
hang on, Paul. Let me for all our admins that are on the channel. Now log on as Don. Please don't do muting and unmuting from the app at the moment. For some reason, it's turning the audio on and off on the
and we get an MFA
video
request. Which
so just let it be whatever setting you're at. Okay, Paul, go ahead and mute it again. All right, go for it.
Yeah, it's bouncing around, but for some reason I'm having some problems with Don responding. If I turn the volume down, does that work for everyone or just me? A few on this.
Yeah, just turn it all the way down.
I'm just going to find.
But everybody's going to hear it broadcasting through. I don't know why we can't just kill that.
Going to use a verification code. Which is frustrating. Never mind. I mean, people can see the demo. So, so what was happening there was the MFA actually failed on my phone, so I had to revert back to using a code. Let me just drop back very quickly there. So yeah, so it sent a notification, but that failed, so I had to do the sign in another way and then type in the code from my phone. That doesn't often fail. It's only every now and again. Normally, if my Wi-Fi isn't working too well on the phone, but you can see it's let Don in there. He's MFA'd and he's through. So yeah, enforcing MFA for everywhere can be unpopular. So all I was going to show here was the bypass. I'm going to stop at that point because we've seen how the IP ranges go in. But the key thing there is making sure, obviously, that you don't lock yourself out. So let's just switch back to the slides. If I share the screen properly, that will. All right, can you see the slides there, Eric?
Yeah, they're starting to come through. There's a little bit of a lag as it switched, but there you go.
It's us, Brits. We're a bit slow. Our internet connections, unfortunately, still run in the Stone Ages. We'll get there. So the next level we want to talk about is when we start adding EMS into the mix. So this is really when we start to get our ability to manage devices and to do deeper conditional access through the Azure AD P1 and P2. So E3 gives us Azure AD P1, and that starts to allow us to do device compliance-based policies. So we do have to do some Intune configuration. Obviously, we need to work out what does a compliant device look like. You know, is it just a device that's registered in Intune? Is it a device that has a 6-digit PIN code rather than a 4-digit? So, you know, these are the things you can configure in Intune. And once Intune says, yes, this device is compliant, we can then base a conditional access policy on that. So that's a nice improvement to just allowing every device in. The next thing we can do with EM+S is look at things like SharePoint site collection scope policies. So again, this needs a conditional access policy in Azure, which is why we need the Azure AD P1. So yeah, you don't have to have EM+S E3. If you want, you can just buy Azure AD Premium P1. That does take away some of the Intune policies though, so like device health and things like that, but it will give you conditional access. It requires some SharePoint configuration at the moment. That was promised in Ignite last year that it was going to be in the GUI. It's not there yet, and it'll be driven through site labels. And we can look at restricting access to web editing, no download, no sync, or even no editing. And we can scope it by person or by group. So we're going to jump into another video. Hopefully this one will stay off.
Yeah, this time I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone's mics, and I'll remove myself or mute myself as well, and hopefully that'll keep us from stepping over the video. So go for it.
Awesome. Cool. So hopefully everyone can see the video now. So this is SharePoint Site Collection Scope Policy. So you just need your Office 365 license and at least an Azure AD P1 or an EM plus S E3, which includes the Azure AD P1. So the demo I'm going to show you here is, this is Johnny, who's just a standard user, and he's logging on from home. And he's going to go into SharePoint. I was obviously having a slow coffee day when I recorded this bit. So I've gone into my office.com, and you can see I'm following two sites, a restricted site and a blocked site, and my standard landing page. So if I go to the landing page, there's no restrictions whatsoever. I can interact with this page as I want, as if I was in the office. If I go to the restricted site, however, I get this banner at the top that says, and you probably can't see that so clearly, but it's, your organization doesn't allow you to download, print, or sync using this device. To use these actions, use a device that's joined to a domain or marked as compliant. If we go into a library, you'll see that we don't have the option to sync, and we don't have the option to download a file. But what we can do is we can view it and edit it in the browser. And if we go into the browser, you'll see then that we also don't have the ability to download from the Office Online. But yeah, we can't stop a screenshot or a photograph. And I think that's a really important thing to really remember with any of these ways of protecting your documentation, is that if people are really intent on getting your data, they can always write it down. So don't forget those side of things. But yeah, so if I go into the blocked site, we can see that this is blocked completely, and that we can't access from this device. Now from a trusted machine, I'm in the restricted site, we get no banner. And if I go into the document library, we'll get the sync option and the ability to download and open in the client. So again, that's just based on where that user's coming from. And again, the blocked site we can actually open now and view and interact with. So looking at how that's configured, yeah, the original errors we used to get were quite horrible, but now at least you get a reason that says, you know, you can't access this resource from a trusted device and to go and talk to your organization. Before, you just got these horrible access denied errors that didn't give you any information. So looking at how we configure this, the first thing we need to do is set up an Azure conditional access policy. Now, Microsoft have got some good docs around setting up. Just one thing to point out, if you're used to using Azure at the moment, just pause it on that point. They've changed the Azure landing page for Azure AD, and all of the security options that used to be down the bottom are now under the security tab. And that literally only rolled out, I think, last week, because it confused the hell out of me at the weekend when I was recording these videos. So under security, we now have conditional access. And in here, I have a policy already that says SharePoint app only, site specific. So we go into that policy. There's a few things we've got set up. The first is that it's got specific users included. It's only targeted at SharePoint Online. And I have a number of conditions. So the first is locations, where I'm saying any location is included, and all my trusted locations, that's all the IP ranges that I've deemed as being trusted. So they're probably our work networks, things like that, the VPN network, they're excluded from the policy. And then we've included the client apps, browsers, mobile apps, all of those. We don't have any grant controls, but what we have is session controls, and we're using app enforced restrictions. So what this does is it says to Intune, don't worry about, you know, blocking the access, pass it through to SharePoint and let SharePoint control the access. So that's the Intune side of things. Then we have to actually tell SharePoint. And we do this through PowerShell at the moment. So we have to connect to the SBO service. You connect to the admin site, and then we use get SBO site for each of the sites that we want to play around with. And each of these sites has a policy called conditional access policy. And I'm going to pull all three of them up. Again, I don't know how clear they are in the video. So the first one is an unrestricted site, and that's set to allow full access. The restricted site is allow limited access, and the blocked site is block access. And that's configured just using the set SPO site command, and you set the conditional access policy to be either of those texts. So let's go back to the slides. Excellent. Come on. There we go. Okay, so are the slides back? Okay.
Yep. You are good to go, sir.
Excellent. So the thing I touched on there is the missing link. And so something they announced at Ignite, they touched a bit on it earlier in the year, and then they showed it in Ignite, is site label access policies. And I'm calling this the missing link. The problem we have in IT is that if a user requests a site collection, or if they create a group, they are not going to come to you and say, oh, I need to block access for this site outside of our organization. Users don't think like that. But what they do think about is site classifications. So if we can train our users to think about, okay, well, I'm building this new site, it's super sensitive. So I'm going to choose how sensitive is your data link, and I'm going to make it high sensitivity. And what we can do is we can use that to drive the conditional access policy that says, hey, this is a high sensitivity site, so I don't want you connecting to it from a coffee shop, or if you're outside, you need to be on a trusted device and things like that. So it starts to allow us to drive the decision around access back to the user and let them say, you know what, this is for the photo club. I don't care about who accesses. This is a low sensitivity site. So we'll allow people to come in on their own device and things like that. So this for me really is the missing link around site classifications, because it takes the requirement off of IT and puts it firmly back in the hands of the user. We do get a certain amount of central admin control coming. So unfortunately, these screenshots are from the video from Ignite. What you can't see here is a sensitivity column where we'll actually be able to control the site sensitivity from central admin. I don't believe that's rolled out anywhere yet. I don't think it's fully on the roadmap yet. But Seshamani, who announced this at Ignite, did say it's definitely coming. If you want to see the Ignite session, it's still there. It's BRK 3101. So the next level up, the more expensive option, EM plus SE5 or Azure AD P2. So we've got a few things we can add now. So we can start looking at risk-based options. So we can start making decisions based on how risky is this sign-in, or how risky is this user, or has this user been compromised? If we combine this with something like Azure Identity Protection, then we start adding a lot of automation layers, and the risk policies in AIP are aggregated based on the actual risk that the user presents and the risk of the sign-in itself, and it creates an aggregated score, and it makes a decision of whether to block or allow access based on that. It also gives us access to things like access reviews and entitlement management. So this now really is the governance layer. So access reviews is about, should this person still have access to this admin account? We can set up a review that they can self-certify on a monthly basis, or we can go through an approval process. There's a whole number of really nice ways of kind of controlling that access and making sure people are only given the access and keeping the access that they need. Package management is around providing a package to a user or a guest, and that's what I really like about this is for the guests, is that you can say, here, go and sign up for this package, and that will give you access to this group, this Azure AD app, and these SharePoint sites. And rather than doing individual invites, it's all done as one package. So we'll have a look at that in one of the demos. So risk sign-ins, this is great. I can start to say, right, when a particular sign-in risk is at a level, then we can grant access, but we can enforce MFA. Access packages, this is the entitlement management. So this is looking at, okay, who can come in, what do they get given, who actually is allowed to request this package, is there approval needed? Something I really like about the entitlement management is the expiration. So I can invite external guests. I can say, look, go here, sign up to this, and in a year's time, it will expire. Now, I've got this set in here to no, but what we can do is we can allow users to extend that themselves. If we tick yes, we can also say, does that need approval? So if you've already gone through an approval once for this, you might think, actually, if they extend their access, I'm not fussed about another approval, so you don't need to. So again, entitlement packages are quite nice. We'll have a look at those in a bit. What the user actually sees is they go to a site called myaccess.microsoft.com, and they'll see the packages that are available to them, and they can select those. So again, we'll drop into a demo for this one. And we'll see if the audio.
So, Paul, we've got someone mentioning that they're moving from E3 to E5, and they saw a spear phishing attack in progress. Not sure how they didn't explain how they did that, but what tools or controls are in place to help with those sort of activities?
So, I mean, definitely with things like the spear phishing, seeing the sign-in log spiking is a great. So you get a lot of good visibility into the sign-in logs in Azure AD. But what you do get with Azure EM plus S E5 is you get access to Cloud App Security. And Cloud App Security is a really wonderful dashboard that just shows you everything that's going on. What's nice is actually only your admins need to have an EM plus S E5 to get access to Cloud App Security. So I always tell my clients, log in, get yourself an E5 license just for a couple of your admins, and it will give you access to that. That alone is worth the money of E5.
Nice.
And if we get time at the end, actually, I'll drop into Cloud App Security. I was going to include it in the demo, but I figured we probably had quite a lot of video to run through, so it's not there, but we can have a quick look. So in this video, we're going to look at the risk-based policies, a bit of identity protection, and the entitlement management. I haven't actually got access reviews working on this. For the next set of demos, we're going to have a look at risk-based. Now, stay quiet, Paul. So this is the Azure portal. Obviously, everyone should be fairly familiar with this. We go into the Active Directory blade, back to the security. I tell a lie, it's not security, it's identity governance, which is on the security tab. No, I'm not. I'm talking risk-based policies, aren't I? Sorry, it's conditional access. And there we go. I've got one set up here, enforce MFA on high-risk sign-in. So this is set to just specific users because I don't want to lock all my test users out. And we have a sign-in risk policy configured, and we say, right, anything that represents a high sign-in risk is going to have this policy applied. And the control that we're granting is we're going to grant access, but we're going to require multi-factor authentication. And only need one of those. We could, if we wanted, we could say, right, you need to be on a trusted device as well, just to make sure that it's not a risk. And what we classify as risk is, it's those anonymous logins. So, for instance, someone coming across the Tor network or things like that, or a coffee shop that's well known for malware, that gets highlighted. So there are a number of security reports, and actually this kind of touches on what Jason was saying about, looking at things like login spikes, and we see these risk events, and it shows when a user is particularly at risk. So the one for me, I was talking about signing from unfamiliar locations. So these are just medium risks for me. But obviously I logged in from my client in London the other week, and their proxy is actually in Tennessee. And for some reason, obviously, I exited out of their Tennessee routing instead of the London office, which would have made a lot more sense. So you do need to be aware if you've got WAN issues that you might have some impossible travel alerts that aren't valid. But yeah, so risk on anonymous VPNs, known cafes that are malware. One thing that's really nice is users with leaked credentials. I'm just going to quickly pause that one there, just talk about that. If you're synchronizing your password hashes into the cloud, what Microsoft will be doing is they're comparing your identities with those lists that are available out in the public world. So sites like Have I Been Pwned, things like that, they publish password lists of users, usernames and password hashes that have been found. So what Microsoft do is they look down those lists and they say, oh, does this identity, so is paul.hunt at my Wolf Consulting address in that list? If it is, it will then take the hash of that password and compare it with the hash of my actual active password. And that will flash up as a compromised account because that password is publicly available on the internet. Now, I recently went in for a client. They're a large multinational with 50,000 users. And when we did this review, they had 6 people that had compromised accounts. And you can guarantee these are the users that use the same password for everything. So they've gone and logged on to trainline.com and they've used their work email address and their work password. And then, of course, that site's been compromised. So hackers have now got those details and they've made them available. So that's really good. And you get that. The users with leaked credentials report, I think, is included just in the standard Office license. So that's a great one to look at. Yeah, my clients are loving it. So jumping on from those reports, the next step up really is then into identity protection. So this is EM plus S E5 needed for this. And this, as I talked about earlier, it uses an aggregated risk score during the user sign-in. So it looks at the inherent risk of a user. So it looks at what that user's behaviors have been. Are they a compromised account? And then it also looks at the sign-in that's happening at the time. And it makes a decision based on that and based on the policies that you configure about what reactions to take. Now, that could be just to enforce MFA. I haven't actually got any of this set up, so I'm showing you the documents from Microsoft here. So this is what the user experience would be for an inbound text message during a sign-in. So it's detected a risky sign-in. It said, you know what, I'm going to enforce MFA. Or we can have a risky sign-in that's completely blocked. Now, if it's blocked, you can recover this by doing MFA or coming in from a trusted site. So that, there's options of recovering from that without getting the service desk involved. And then after that, there'll be an enforced password update. If the account's been compromised and it's been blocked, there's no option for self-service. It will force you down the route of going to your service desk. The service desk will generate a temporary password, and then you'll be able to sign back in again. So you need to kind of come up with this balance of how secure do you want to be without completely enforcing and inconveniencing the users. It's quite a balance to find out. So the next one is I want to look at is entitlement management. So this is currently in preview. Again, it's through the identity governance page. And what we can do is we can set up a number of catalogs. So you can break down your access packages in catalogs. And then this is an actual access package being set up. So we've defined a number of resource roles. So the resource roles is either a group, and that can be an Office 365 or AD security group, a SharePoint online site, or Azure AD groups. Azure AD apps. The policy defines who the package is for. So in this case, it's for users not in the directory, and that it will create guests as people sign up. Something that's really nice about this is I can add approvers. I've just been through with the company I'm working with. They've just been through a major acquisition, and the decision was taken that on day one, everyone in the acquired company needed to have access to the Office 365 intranet. So onboarding another 2,000 users is going to be a nightmare for the help desk. The B2B invite process isn't particularly nice. So what we did was we set up a conditional access policy that was based on the domain of the requester. So anyone who came in from the acquired domain using their logon, their Office 365 logons, they would be automatically approved, and they were given access to the SharePoint intranet. They were given access to the onboarding teams, the training sites. It was all done as a single package. The end user just has to sign on once, and then all of that set up in the background. So in the demo I've got here, I've just got 2, and I've set up an expiration of 2 days. You can set a maximum expiration of 10 years. I'm kind of intrigued if anyone would use 10 years. And I said earlier, we can set the ability to extend with or without additional approval. So the key one here is this My Access portal link. So this will take the user directly to that request URL. They can go to myaccess.microsoft.com and select from tenants as well, but this is the end user going to the My Access portal. There's the package that's made available to them. So they can highlight that and click Request Access, put a business justification in. They can choose for a specific time period if need be, but we're just going to submit that. So this is back in the admin portal. I can see the submitted request. Back in the admin portal properly, sorry, there's the submitted request. So I can see this changing status. So what I'm looking for it to become is pending approval. Obviously, if it was an auto approve, it would just go straight to approved. From this admin portal, though, I can't actually approve it. All I can do is cancel the request and reprocess the request. As an approver, I'll receive an email that sends me to the My Access page. But in this case, I'll actually go to the Approvals tab, and I'll see the request that's come in, and I can approve that. And from this page, we can see once we've approved it and given a justification, we can actually see the behavior of that approval as it goes through. In fact, if I switch back to on this one, I switch back to the user. The user can see at any point whether it's been approved, what's happening when it's setting up the permissions. We should see that in a minute. It took a little while, so we can see the approval. It's delivering, and then we jump ahead and it goes to delivered. So there you go. So at that point, there's another notification sent out to the user that says, right, you've now got all the access that was set up in that package. And the user can then go to the site. So it's going to use a link that's just going to go to the landing page of my SharePoint site. Now, what I've also got here is conditional access set up that we get the normal B2B consent statement. Then this is going to trigger what's called terms of access. Now, if anyone's looked at this, this is a way of basically getting your guest users to sign up and say, do you know what? I accept your terms of use. So this just delivers a PDF, and this you can put in multiple languages. It's up to you to translate and make those terms of use available. And the users has another conditional access policy where they have to accept those terms of use before they're allowed in. And you can expire again terms of use on a monthly, yearly basis, etc. So people have to ascertain that they're happy. So back to the slides. Cool. Okay, so we're powering through the access layers in Microsoft, and the ones we're going to have a look at now is Azure AD PIM and PAM. So these really aren't sort of conditional access. This is about controlling that just in time or just enough approval. So this is about managing elevation of privileges. So one of the nice things to do is to look at reducing the amount of standing access, admin access that you have in your tenant. I mean, the Microsoft Secure Score will always say, oh, you've got more than 4 global admins, that's bad. Kind of depends how big your organization is. You know, if you've got 50,000 users, then 4 global admins to me isn't a lot. If you've got 10 users, then it's too many. And in here, we'll have a look at access reviews. So privileged identity management and privileged access management are kind of 2 flavors. So PIM is all about the role. It's about, does this person need access to that role? Is it approved? And PAM is about what the task they're trying to do. And at the moment, PAM only supports Exchange Online, but they will be extending that. So again, for PIM, we need an Azure AD P2 or EM plus SE5. And for PAM, you need Office 365 E5 or the Advanced Compliance SKU. So just to be confusing there. Comparing the two, Azure PIM, actually this is a bit out of date. It was available for 32 admin roles. They've actually extended that quite significantly. You can also put PIM on Azure resources, so you can control what people access resources they can have to building stuff in Azure and things like that. And PIM is very much person focused. It's about the person doing something. PAM is very much focused around the tasks that they're doing. So you can configure, I need to elevate privileges, for instance, to set up a forwarding rule and things like that. And that's the demo we're going to have a look at. Looking at PIM, in fact, I'm going to skip through. We can look at the Azure AD directory roles. This is the eligible roles that I have as the user that's signed in here. So we can see that I'm eligible to be a global admin, but I'm not currently active. So at this point, I can then go and activate that role. I can set a start time if I want. So for instance, if I was doing a change request at 10 o'clock tonight, I could set my global admin automatically to come on maybe 20 minutes before. I'd always recommend a period before. And we can choose an activation reason. The activation duration is controlled in the admin console. So we can control how much time a user can request. So by default, global admin set to a maximum of 4 hours. But we can change that down to 1 hour if we wanted. Let's have a look at PIM. So I'm dropping into logging into the Office portal there, and you'll notice that I didn't have access to the admin site. So I'm coming into Privileged Identity Management. I'm going to choose the SharePoint Service Administrator. I'm activating that. I'm going to choose it. So I can choose that down to just a few hours and put a reason in there. Now, these reasons are all captured in the audit logs as well. So that's activated. Now, this experience has changed slightly. You used to have to come out, and that's the access there. And then you'd have to come out and actually force a login. And you do this through application access and then force it again. And that was just a horrible experience. Now there's actually an automation process that signs you out and signs you back in again as soon as you activate. So at this point, it takes a few minutes to activate. But when I reload the portal, I've now got the admin portal there. And if I go through to that, I have the SharePoint access that I need. Again, SharePoint and OneDrive. So looking at the actual configuration side of that, there's a few things to look at. And again, this is all under Azure AD Privileged Identity Management. You can now get to this through the identity governance, but I find it quicker just to use the search box. I can always go in and deactivate once I've finished. So again, this is Nigel going in and just deactivating the role he's finished with. Again, good governance here is I finished the change. I'm about to get on the train and go home. So let's get rid of the access that I had. And the sign out just makes sure that that's enforced. Okay, so back in the roles, we can see now that I'm not active anymore. So the admin experience for that is, again, back in the Azure portal. You need to be a global admin or a privileged identity manager, and you can configure the Azure AD roles. So this list is a little bit out of date when I show the list. Just a little bit here. This is the audit history. So this will show everyone's request. It will include all their reasons and things like that. And these are the roles. Now, this list has grown even more. There's now a lot more of the services that have individual setups. So I've got a user here who's a permanent admin. I'm going to click that and make them eligible. So this is a really quick way of converting those standing accesses now to eligible access. So next time Don wants to log in as the team service admin, he'll actually have to request that role. And again, you can very quickly look at all the admin roles that people have. This can be quite a scary page to go to for the first time in a new client, when you see that they've got 52 global admins, and you can go through and make changes to make people eligible roles. So some of the admin tasks that we've got to do, we talked about the length of the roles. So through the settings and through the role, I can actually choose, here's the global admin. I can set the maximum activation. I can set whether emails are going to be sent, whether we require an incident or request number to be captured, whether we want to enforce MFA. Some of the roles like global admin automatically enforce MFA anyway. So there's a few things you can't change there. But the approvers works quite nicely. You get some good emails. I know the client I work with at the moment, about 50 people get notified every time I elevate my privileges to global admin. So let's go back to the slides. So the last thing to talk about is the privileged access management. And as I said, this is currently only for Exchange. The configuration is a mixture of admin GUI and Exchange PowerShell. So configuring wise, we set up our request approvers group. So there has to be a group configured in Office 365 that's mail enabled. Without that, we can't actually configure the service. And then through the Office 365, I can't get to my button there. There we go. Through the security and privacy tab, we turn on privileged access, and then we need to set the scope. So we configure the group and say which group to use. And then we need to go in and manage the access policies and requests. And this is where we actually define what our policies are going to be for PAM. So there's a number of things you can do. So the policy type will be a task, a role, or a role group. The policy scope is Exchange, and that's all that's on that drop down for now. The policy name, the approval type is whether it's manual or auto. And then the approval group, if you need to change it, you can have different groups. Obviously sends different approvals. So the tasks are things like add mailbox folder permissions, searching a mailbox, new journal rules. The one I've used, this one, I touched on it earlier, is the mailbox forwarding rule. So before someone can set up a mailbox forwarder, the first thing they have to do is elevate their privilege. The role ones is things like changing audit logs, reading audit logs, changing address lists, changing DLP. And the role group is when you're actually doing anything within that group. So if you want to do something that's to do with unified messaging, then you'd have to elevate your privileges to do any of those actions. So that's kind of a higher level way of doing it. So for this one, I've set up a policy for a new journal rule, which is the forwarding rule. And we'll have a look at that in the demo. How are we doing for time, Eric?
You are good, sir. Carry on.
Awesome. Cool. We will have time to then have a quick look at Cloud App Security, I think. So this is PAM in action. So as an Exchange admin, obviously we do pretty much everything through the through PowerShell. Apparently they don't like going to the GUI, so I'm told. So I'm going to connect to an Exchange PowerShell session. I appreciate this might not be too clear in the video, but this is connect-xops session. That's going to get me a connection. I'm going to get logged in. There we go. Exchange is connected now. So I'm doing a new journal rule. I'm giving it the recipient mailbox that I want to apply it to. And in this case, it's a user from my organization. And then the journal email address, so where I'm sending it to. And this is rogueaccount@hotmail.com. And the scope is global. I want to send everything. I'm just giving that a name of dodgy journal rule and hit return. So the error that's come back there is insufficient permissions. Please raise an elevated access request for this task. So I need to do a new elevated access request. I'm going to give it a reason. I'm going to give it the task that I want. So new journal rule. Going to skip ahead a little bit here. So adding some reasons in. Now, I actually got an error on this one and a nice Watson dump. I was like, okay, why was this? It turns out that the task has to be in a particular format, and that's ready for when they actually extend this. So the task there was Exchange/new journal rule. You saw there was a pop-up there for me to log on. It creates a new PowerShell session for the MFA. And there we go. So that set up the request. And currently the approval status is pending. So an email then goes to the relevant admin that said the request has come in and it needs approving. Now, to avoid the risk of phishing, I quite like this. These PAM emails don't have a link. You've got to log on to the admin portal to actually set that up. So you log into the admin portal under security and privacy. Under the privilege, we can manage access requests and policies. So this is where the requests are. And that's the pending request. And I'm going to approve that there. I'll skip ahead a little bit. So if I now take that identity of this request I can now get the elevated access request and get the status of it. So if I wanted to do something in a script here, I could be sitting there polling that and saying, has it been approved yet? Has it been approved yet? And in this case, yes, it's been approved, and the person who's approved it. And again, now I can set the journal rule up. There we go. That's the journal rule created. And if we log into the mailbox, we look at the journal rules. There's our dodgy journal rule that's been created. Excuse me. Which I'm going to delete so I don't forward everything to rogueaccount@hotmail.com. So that's Pam. Let's go back to the last few slides. And then once we finish the slides, I'll drop into look at a little bit at Cloud App Security, because that's really quite nice. There we go. So a couple of gotchas with Pam. The key one is the authorizers need to have access to the admin GUI. So just adding them to the approvers group doesn't grant them access to the admin role. So you need to obviously make sure that they can access the GUI. And manual approval means you can't self-grant approval, which kind of makes sense. So auto approval is required if you're going to self-grant. So there's a few resources available in the slide deck, and we'll send this around. I'm sure Eric will make them available, or send a link to the OneDrive with these in. These are basically links to the configuration articles that Microsoft have published around each of the things we've looked at. What I'll do now is we'll just drop into, if I get my correct one up here, let's have a look at Cloud App Security. So I don't want the Azure portal, I want Office 365 portal. So there's a few ways to get to Cloud App Security. One is to remember the URL and bookmark it, which I haven't got on this session. But if you go through the admin center and go all admin centers, it says it used to be at the bottom here. So in the old admin center, it was very handily here, which is nice and easy to remember, but it's portal.cloudappsecurity.com. So that's taking its time to log in. So this is the Cloud App Security dashboard. And you can see straight away there's a couple of open alerts here. So we've got some impossible travel. What's really nice about this dashboard now is if I click into an alert, the first thing that I see is I get the activity log. So this is the audit log from Azure. This is the audit log from Office 365. So I can see things like where this account that was logged in has changed subscription statuses, done a search query, it's accessed files. So straight away, if I suspect a particular logon has had a problem, I can start seeing the activities they've been doing. So Jason talked about a login spike. So hopefully Cloud App Security would pick this up, and you'd come into these alerts and you go, oh, okay, yeah, we've got, in fact, what have I got here? Activity from infrequent country, impossible travel. I trigger impossible travel a lot because of the company I'm working with at the moment. Their WAN routing is horrendous. So 1 minute I'll be coming out of London, the next minute I'll be coming out of Nashville. And that screws up alerting completely. So you definitely need to make sure your WAN routing and your proxies are set up quite nicely. Again, activity from infrequent countries, you can see that happening, and we can see the different people here. So Don logged in from Germany. This was while I was presenting at Wiesbaden at ECS, and we can see what Don was doing. You can see the IP addresses. So we can very quickly see if there's a bunch of different IP addresses using this, and especially if they're across different locations. We can see what device they're using, where the browser. If we actually click into the alert, we can see their frequent locations, and we can start to take action. So what's really nice is I can look at all the activity the same type. We can look at activity from the same IP address. So if we suspect an IP range is perhaps giving us some problems, we can look at every attempt from that IP address or every attempt from that same country or region. So there's some really nice ones. The other actions we can do there is I'll find my there we go. Sorry, the user actions. So we can enforce the user to log in again. We can suspend the user, and we can take these actions instantly from this dashboard. We don't have to switch out to the Azure AD portal. We don't have to do anything like that. We can start to take action from here. We can also look at setting up app policies. So control policies allow us to say, right, what happens when someone logs in from a risky IP address? So this is kind of a combination of, you can look at using identity protection, or you can look at using the cloud access security policies to do similar things. So you can say, right, what's going to happen when the user logs on from a risky IP address? If we edit the policy, you can set up the activities that set it up and whether it's a repeated action. So conditional access works on a single action. Cloud access security looks at what's the pattern of behaviors and things like that. So it really starts to build on top of that. You can also set up alerting. So if this is someone logging on to the CEO's mailbox, you probably want to be alerted quite quickly. So we can set up text alerts and things like that. So cloud app security is definitely a nice thing. The other thing you can do with cloud app security is start tying it into things like Windows Defender. So if you've got Windows 10 rolled out with Windows Defender, it will start telling cloud app security what shadow IT people are logging onto. So it will tell you when people log on to Dropbox and Facebook for Business and things like that. And you can also look at uploading your firewall logs. So you can go to the Cloud Discovery snapshot. You can upload your logs, and they'll take logs from F5s, some of the main firewall vendors, and it will generate reports showing what users are doing, what they're going to, that sort of thing. So there's an immense amount of cloud app security stuff you can play with here. And as I said, you only need your admins to have E5 to get access to this. So it's definitely well worth looking at. That's a really good question, Jason. Certainly, if you're using the Microsoft DLP, then no. But for third party, I don't have an answer to that, I'm afraid. I'd have to have a dig. They were talking about basically being able to enforce the DLP policies even if you were using Dropbox. I'll have to have a look into what's required to get that configured.
Well, if you do find something out on that, Paul, be sure to post it on Twitter, tag DFW Spug. And also, if you'd like to cruise on by our Facebook group, we'll be happy to add you as a member, and you can post some information there. Cool.
Well, so at that point, we're kind of got 7 minutes left now, I guess, for any questions. Well, we've had a few as we're going, but that's pretty much everything I wanted to show. And I'm really pleased that the videos worked, so everyone got to see the demos. I guess at that point we'll open it up if there's any questions.
Yeah, so I have one, maybe not necessarily content related, but when you're talking to customers or potential customers about all this stuff, do they have an inkling how complex this is and how much Microsoft has to offer around this arena? In other words, do they understand, or are they starting to get an understanding that you really need someone full-time focused on this stuff in an organization to really make it work?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is, oh, hell no, they haven't got a clue. So I came into the organization I'm working with currently. There's 70,000 users, and I came in to do a kind of a risk assurance on their Office 365 configuration. And one of the first things we did was we powered up Cloud App Security, and they were like, oh. I mean, so the first thing I showed them was the compromised accounts. They'd never looked at it, and I said, these are people who are logging in every day with an account that's out in the public. That account is available to be purchased across the internet with the valid password. So the absolute first thing you need to do with those people is lock their accounts and enforce a password change. These reports are here and available to them, but a lot of clients don't go digging. I think the big problem is there's so much that companies are scared to go and look. They're scared of turning on automation, and I guess in a way they're right to be, because you can very quickly lock down too much. There's a really fine line between securing your data, securing your environment, and really annoying your users. The problem is, if we annoy our users too much, they'll find the path of least resistance and they'll go and find a different route to do what they want to do. So yeah, it's they definitely need help.
And how do you, there's a tremendous amount of buttons and dials and switches and levers and whatnot in here. You'll note that I pronounce levers properly. How do you get started in really figuring out, let's say I'm tasked with being the security person in the organization, because I'm the only one who knows how to spell Office 365 with a capital O. How do you even get started figuring all this stuff out?
I think really the best place is looking at the reports, understanding the information that's available first, and looking at the things that we can turn on from a reporting point of view, but not take action on. So, you know, a lot of the things we can do is we can do like conditional access. We can do the what if work. So I can define a conditional access policy. I can set up a group of users, test users, and then I can run what if scenarios just through the GUI. So that's a great way of testing and understanding what the impact of that group is. The key thing there is about pilot testing. When you're going to do any form of conditional access control, you need to pilot test before you release it to the worldwide. It's important to understand what the impact's going to be to the end users. So definitely, I mean, we do a lot of work out in the business with business champions, and they are absolutely always our pilot testers. You know, they understand the needs of the business. They understand what people are going to be going out and doing when they're mobile, things like that. You know, IT as a clue, don't really understand what the business do. We don't generally need to. So having those business champions involved in any of the kind of the design and talking to them about what you want to achieve, that's really important before we even start looking at how we can do it. But then getting into the configuration, it's understanding what you're licensed for as well. You saw a few of the demos where actually the options are all on the same page, but you need different license options for different things. And a lot of reliance is, have you already rolled out Intune? Have you already rolled out this? So there's some decisions to make around what do you do first. You can't do everything at once. So do we make device control the most important thing? Do we just lock down the perimeter on day one? There's a lot of choices there to make, and I don't think there is an easy, you should do this first. A lot has to be driven by what are the needs of the business. If you can say, right, our business isn't mobile, we don't go out, we don't use mobile devices, great, you can lock everything down. But I think the nature of the world is the users are now demanding the ability to work agilely. They want to be able to work from home. They want to be able to stop at a coffee shop at lunchtime and pick up their emails and stuff like that. So we need to be able to support that whilst maintaining control.
Now, you were speaking about compromised accounts a few minutes ago, and Damien is asking, in that dashboard where you can see those compromised accounts happening, is there a way to generate some reports out of that and deliver it into the hands of the people who need to see it?
Yeah. So let me just quickly share my screen again. So in Azure AD, and if we go into security and we look at our users flagged for risk, so the first thing that happens is they'll flag up here. Now there is a new view coming, and it states to the users that are at risk, and you can click on them and it will show you what their risk is. And so for this particular risk, here's the risky sign-ins. It will show us that wasn't the one I want to see. Here we go. Sorry, it's the risk history. So you'll get an entry in here that says compromised account. So any of these risk reports, basically, you can look at. You can download this list as well. Put that into Excel. Give that to the people that need to see it. That's it. The risk events one breaks it down. In fact, this is probably a better view. So this shows each of the risk events one by one. So if I had compromised accounts, there'd be one here that says user has compromised account. You click on it and it will give you a list of all the users that are affected. And again, this can be downloaded as well and given to the people that need to do it. What's really nice is I can actually enforce from the actual risk. If I go to the risk itself, you can enforce. I haven't got the control on this one, but you can actually say, right, reset this user's password, enforce it. And that's really nice, being able to actually take action from the dashboard, not have to go back to Azure AD, reset their password, things like that. So I think that's what Microsoft is starting to do a lot better, is, put those actions where they need to be, rather than making people switch context all the time and, go and find things. But that compromised account report, when I gave that to the security guys, scared the hell out of them.
I can imagine it did. Now, one last question for me, because we're just at time here, and that is that whole sign in from unfamiliar locations thing drives me absolutely bananas, because it's always flagging my account. Do we have some way that we can tweak that for certain user accounts?
So if you start actually processing these alerts and you say, this is a false positive, it will learn from that. So there's two ways that this learns.
Instead of ignoring it like I do?
Yeah, basically you've got to go in and manage these alerts. If you want it to improve, you've got to manage it. It improves anyway through behavior. It learns what your organization looks like. Now, obviously, if you work for a small organization, there's not as much information for it to learn from. Working for a large organization, I'm working, as I said, with a 60, 70,000 seat organization. It's really learned where all the local users go, where they log on from. So it starts to build up that picture of what is an unfamiliar location. So now I know that when I do see unfamiliar location, chances are it really is someone going to maybe a new client or a new place. So we've got the ability to look into that and see what that user's doing. So one of the things the guys are doing is you can get all this information through the Microsoft Graph. So what they actually have is a report that's pulled out of the graph. Then it goes and gets the user's calendar, and it gets all their bookings for that day and releases that in an email to the security admin. So the security admin can say, right, this user's got a booking to be in Dallas, and the unfamiliar location is Dallas. I'm going to write that off as a false positive. So, when we start looking at things that are available through the graph, this then gets even more powerful. And, you can do stuff through the graph that you can do through Cloud App Security. You just got to roll your own. So there is always the option, if you don't want to go down the E5 route, of using the graph to do the same sort of thing. But that's down to you to write and build a nice GUI for.
Right. Wow, that was fantastic. That was a tremendous amount of information, Paul. Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. Please do let us know if you post these slides anywhere. We'll put up a link to that.
I'll stick them on SlideShare and I'll tweet them out.
Sounds great. Yeah, drop a line to me on that. I want to thank everybody for joining us. If things work out, next month we'll be talking Power BI next month with Jason Himmelstein and John White, if they can still join us, hopefully. If not, we'll find somebody else to come and wow us with some great information, as Paul just did. The recording will be available next week. So as soon as we get done processing that, we'll post it. Look out for a link to that. Always register for the next session, even if you don't plan to attend. That way you get the link to the video when it posts automatically. Otherwise, you can check our channel that was in the slide deck. You can go over to the handouts section and grab that. And I think that's the end of our Q&A and questions. Thank you, everybody, for the feedback. We look forward to seeing you all next month. Have a great one.
Thank you, everyone.